Hi there. I'm Storyteller tonight, and I'm here to guide you into sleep with a tale that slowly slips into your mind like fog on a quiet evening. Before we begin, take a deep breath, settle into your space, and let the day fall away. You can close your eyes if you'd like. We're just getting started. I was never one to believe in the supernatural. The world made sense to me in its own predictable way, with its patterns and routines, its logical explanations for seemingly inexplicable events. Science could account for the strange sounds in old houses. Psychology could explain away the feeling of being watched. That's what I told myself anyway on the day I first stepped foot into the old Victorian on Blackwood Lane. It was early autumn when I found the listing. The real estate market had been brutal, prices soaring well beyond what a high school English teacher like myself could afford. But there it was, nestled between overpriced condos and modern monstrosities, a beautiful, if somewhat neglected Victorian home with a price tag that made me question if there had been a misplaced decimal point. There must be something wrong with it, my sister Elaine had said over the phone when I told her about the place. A house that size in that neighborhood for that price? Either the foundation is crumbling or someone was murdered there. She laughed, but there was concern beneath her humor. The listing says it needs some TLC, I replied, scrolling through the photos again. The images showed rooms with high ceilings and ornate moldings, hardwood floors that needed refinishing, and wallpaper that belonged to another era entirely. But structurally it's sound. The inspection came back clean. Still, Jacob, be careful. If something seems too good to be true, knew she was right to be cautious. After Claire left me last year, taking half our savings and leaving me with an apartment I could barely afford on my own, I'd been desperate for a fresh start. Maybe that desperation had clouded my judgment, but standing in the foyer of that house during the showing, something about the place had spoken to me. The way the light filtered through the stained glass above the door, casting colorful patterns across the worn floorboards. The solid feel of the banister beneath my hand. The sense of history and permanence that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The realtor, a nervous woman named Margaret, had been oddly reticent about the previous owners. The family moved rather suddenly, was all she would say. Her eyes, never quite meeting mine. They were eager to sell. I should have pressed her for more information. I should have wondered why she seemed so anxious to leave the house, even as she extolled its character and period details. But all I saw was an opportunity, a home of my own, with enough space for the library I'd always dreamed of, in a neighborhood with tree-lined streets and a quiet dignity that appealed to me. So I signed the papers, emptied my savings account for the down payment, and 2 weeks later, I moved in. October 17th. I remember the date clearly because it was uncommonly warm for mid-autumn, the kind of day that fools you into believing winter will never come. My belongings looked almost comically sparse in the spacious rooms. My furniture, chosen for a much smaller apartment, seemed to shrink in the presence of the high ceilings and generous proportions of the old house. I made a mental note to visit some thrift stores, maybe pick up some pieces that would be more in keeping with the home's character. That first night, I slept in what I assumed had been the master bedroom, a large room on the second floor with windows overlooking the backyard. The previous owners had left behind heavy velvet curtains that blocked out the streetlights completely, plunging the room into a darkness so complete it felt almost solid. I remember thinking I should replace them with something lighter, something that would let in the morning sun. I fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the move, and dreamed of corridors that stretched and twisted, leading me deeper into a house that seemed much larger in my dreams than in reality. In the dream, I was searching for something, though I didn't know what. Each door I opened revealed a room filled with shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. I woke, suddenly heart-pounding with the distinct impression that someone had whispered my name. The darkness was disorienting, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was. Then it came back to me. The house, the move, my new beginning. Just a dream, I muttered to myself, reaching for my phone to check the time. 3:17 a.m. I lay back, down, trying to shake off the lingering unease, and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next few days passed in a blur of unpacking and settling in. I arranged my books in the built-in shelves of what must have once been a study, placed my desk beneath the window that looked out onto the front yard, and gradually began to feel like the house was becoming mine. But there were oddities I couldn't help noticing. The temperature seemed to fluctuate wildly in certain rooms, dropping suddenly even when the heating was on. There were strange drafts that I couldn't trace to any obvious source. And sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I would catch what looked like movement, a shadow shifting where no shadow should be. But when I turned to look directly, there was nothing there. I chalked it up to the quirks of an old house and my own imagination, still working overtime after the stress of the move and the end of my relationship. Old houses settled, pipes creaked. Shadows played tricks in rooms with unconventional angles and period light fixtures. There was nothing to worry about. Then came the whispers. I first heard them on my 5th night in the house. I was grading papers in the study, red pen in hand. The only sound, the occasional scratch of marking against paper, and the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. It was nearing midnight, but I wanted to finish the stack before bed. At first, it was so faint I thought it might be the wind outside or perhaps water running through the pipes. A soft, sibilant sound that hovered just at the edge of hearing. But gradually, I became aware that there was a pattern to it, a rhythm that seemed almost like speech. I put down my pen and listened more intently. The sound seemed to be coming from the wall behind me, where built-in bookshelves housed my collection of classic literature and teaching materials. I stood up and pressed my ear against the wood paneling. Should never have come back. The words were barely audible, like someone whispering from a great distance, but they were unmistakably words. I jerked away from the wall, my heart suddenly hammering in my chest. "Hello?" I called out, feeling foolish even as I did so. There was no one else in the house. I checked all the rooms when I moved in, made sure all the windows were locked, set the alarm system each night. Silence answered me. Even the whispering had stopped. I stood there for a long moment, listening to my own quickened breathing before finally convincing myself that I had imagined it. A trick of acoustics, perhaps, carrying a neighbor's conversation through the walls in some strange way. I finished grading the papers, though my concentration was shot, and went to bed. That night I dreamed again of the house, but this time I wasn't alone. Shadows moved through the halls ahead of me, always just turning a corner or slipping through a doorway as I approached. And all the while, the whispers continued, just quiet, enough that I couldn't make out the words. In the morning I made coffee and tried to laugh off my unease. It was Saturday, and I had planned to tackle some of the cleaning that the house desperately needed. The previous owners had left the place in reasonably good condition, but there was a layer of dust on everything, and the wallpaper in several rooms was peeling at the seams. I started in the kitchen, scrubbing down cabinets and wiping away years of accumulated grime from the corners and crevices. It was mundane work, but satisfying in its concrete results. By noon, the kitchen was spotless, and I had moved on to the dining room, where an ornate chandelier hung with crystals that had lost their sparkle beneath a film of dust. As I stood on a stepladder, carefully wiping each crystal, I felt a sudden chill pass through the room. It was as if someone had opened a window to the October air, but when I glanced around, all the windows were closed. And then I heard it again. That whispering, slightly louder this time, though still indistinct. The shadows remember. I nearly fell off the ladder, catching myself at the last moment. The voice seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the room like a cold mist. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice sounding thin and reedy in the sudden silence that followed my question. No answer came. I stepped down from the ladder and walked through the house, checking each room, looking behind doors and inside closets like a child frightened of monsters. Everything was as it should be. No signs of intrusion, no open windows, no explanations for the voice I was certain I had heard. That evening I called Elaine. "How's the new place?" she asked, her voice warm and familiar, grounding me back. In reality, I hesitated, unsure of how much to say. Elaine was practical to a fault. She'd think I was losing my mind if I told her I was hearing voices in the walls. "It's good, lots of space, needs some work, but I'm getting there." "You sound tired." "Just been cleaning all day," I said, forcing a lightness into my tone that I didn't feel. "Hey, did you ever hear of houses making strange noises, like maybe carrying sounds from the neighbors or the street in unusual ways?" There was a pause on the line. "What kind of noises are you hearing, Jacob?" "Nothing, really. Just sometimes it sounds like voices. Probably just the TV from next door or something." "Are you sure you're okay?" The concern in her voice was evident. "You know you can stay with us if you need to. Brian wouldn't mind." "I'm fine," I insisted. "Really, just getting used to the place." After we hung up, I poured myself a generous glass of whiskey and settled into the armchair in the living room. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of timber and the soft hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Normal house sounds, nothing to be alarmed about. I must have dozed off in the chair because the next thing I knew, I was jerking awake to a sound that sent ice through my veins, a child's laughter, high and clear, coming from upstairs. I sat frozen, the empty whiskey glass still clutched in my hand, listening as the laughter faded to silence. There were no children in my house. I lived alone. The nearest neighbors were an elderly couple on one side and a young professional woman on the other, neither of whom had children. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stood and made my way to the staircase. The steps creaked beneath my weight. As I climbed, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet house. "Hello?" I called out, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "Is someone there?" The second floor was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside filtering through the gaps in the curtains. I moved from room to room, turning on lights as I went, finding nothing out of place, no signs that anyone else had been there. Finally, only one room remained, a small bedroom at the end of the hall that I had been using for storage. The door was closed as I had left it, but as I approached, I noticed something odd. There was a thin line of light visible beneath the door, though I knew there was no light on in that room. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the doorknob. The metal was ice cold against my palm. I turned it slowly and pushed the door open. The room was dark and empty, filled with the boxes I had yet to unpack. No light, no child, nothing out of the ordinary. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and reached for the light switch. As the overhead light flickered on, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow darting from one side of the room to the other. But when I turned my head, there was nothing there. "You're overtired," I said aloud, needing to hear a human voice, even if it was just my own. "You fell asleep in the chair and had a bad dream, that's all." I closed the door and went back downstairs, deciding that sleep, real sleep in my bed, was what I needed. But as I passed through the living room, I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. On the coffee table next to where I had been sitting was a child's drawing, done in crayon on a piece of yellowed paper. It showed a house, my house, recognizable by its distinctive Victorian silhouette, with dark shapes pressing against the windows. their elongated forms suggesting something more sinister than human. And in one of the upstairs windows, a small figure that might have been a child, its face a scribble of black crayon. I had never seen the drawing before. It hadn't been there when I fell asleep. My hands shook as I picked it up, the paper crackling with age beneath my fingers. I told myself there had to be a rational explanation. Perhaps it had been tucked inside one of my books and fallen out when I moved them to the shelves. Perhaps the previous owners had left it behind, and it had somehow ended up on the coffee table. But no explanation could account for the chill that ran through me as I stared at those dark shapes, those shadows that seemed to be trying to get in, or perhaps, I thought with a sudden, terrible clarity, trying to get out. I slept poorly that night, waking often to the sound of creaking floorboards and what might have been footsteps in the hallway outside my room. Each time I turned on the light and checked, finding nothing but shadow and silence. By morning, I was exhausted and jumpy, startling at every noise. Work was a welcome distraction. Teaching literature to teenagers might have its challenges, but at least it was familiar, normal. I threw myself into discussions of symbolism in The Fall of the House of Usher, trying not to think about the irony of teaching Poe while living in a house that was beginning to feel increasingly ominous. "Mr. Reynolds, you okay?" asked Mia, one of my more perceptive students, as the others filed out at the end of class. "You seem, I don't know, distracted." "Just a bit tired," I said, managing a smile. New house, still getting used to all its noises. "My mom says old houses have personalities," Mia replied with a shrug, "like they remember everything that's happened in them." Her words stayed with me as I drove home that afternoon, the sky already darkening with the early sunset of late autumn. What if houses did remember? What would mine have to say about the people who had lived there before me? What secrets might be embedded in its walls? I had never bothered to research the history of the house, assuming it was just an ordinary old home that had seen generations of ordinary families. But now, pulling into the driveway, looking up at the darkened windows that seemed to stare back at me like empty eyes, I wondered if there was more to its past than I knew. The local library was open until 8. Instead of going inside, I turned the car around and headed back into town. The librarian, an older woman with silver-rimmed glasses and a no-nonsense attitude, looked up as I approached the reference desk. "Can I help you find something?" she asked. "I'm hoping to research the history of a house in town," I said. 36 Blackwood Lane, the old Victorian. Something flickered across her face. Recognition, certainly, but also something else. Concern? Unease? "The Blackwood House," she said softly. "Yes, we have some information on that property. Local history section, and there might be some newspaper archives that mention it. Any particular aspect of its history you're interested in?" "The previous owners," I replied. "Or any incidents that might have occurred there." She gave me a long look. "You're living there now?" I nodded. "I see." She stood and gestured for me to follow her to a section of shelves labeled Local History. "You might want to start with this." She pulled down a heavy book titled Millfield, A Pictorial History, and handed it to me. "Thank you," I said. "Is there anything specific I should know about the house? You seem to recognize it right away." The librarian hesitated, adjusting her glasses. "Old houses have histories, Mr. Reynolds. Jacob Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds. Some more colorful than others. The Blackwood House has been standing for nearly 150 years. It's seen its share of life and death, but I wouldn't put too much stock in local gossip." She offered a thin smile. "The microfiche for the town newspaper goes back to 1902, if you want to check that as well." I spent the next 2 hours poring over yellowed photographs and newspaper Clippings. The house had been built in 1873 by a wealthy merchant named Thaddeus Blackwood, who lived there with his wife and 3 children. After his death in 1891, the house passed to his son, then to a series of owners throughout the 20th century. It was when I reached the 1980s that I found what I was looking for, or perhaps what I had been dreading to find. A headline from the Millfield Gazette, dated November 2, 1987. Local family found dead in home. Police suspect murder-suicide. The article described how Martin Winters, his wife Rebecca, and their 7-year-old daughter Emily had been found dead in their home at 36 Blackwood Lane. According to the police, Martin had apparently killed his wife and daughter before taking his own life, though the motive remained unclear. Neighbors were quoted expressing shock, describing the family as quiet and normal. A follow-up article a week later mentioned that Martin's journal had been found, containing increasingly paranoid entries about shadows that moved on their own and voices in the walls. The police had concluded that he had suffered a psychotic break. My hands were shaking as I replaced the microfiche. It could be a coincidence, I told myself. Mental illness could manifest in many ways. Just because Martin Winters had written about shadows and voices didn't mean there was anything supernatural about the house. More likely, his deteriorating mental state had latched onto the natural quirks of the old building, interpreting them through the lens of his psychosis. But as I drove home in the dark, the rational explanations felt hollow. I couldn't stop thinking about the child's laughter I had heard, the drawing I had found. Had Emily Winters somehow remained in the house where she had died? Were her parents there too, trapped in some terrible replay of their final moments? The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway, which was strange because I distinctly remembered leaving the porch light on that morning. As I approached the front door, keys in hand, I noticed something else. A shadow, human-shaped, moving past one of the upstairs windows. It could have been a trick of the light, a reflection of the trees swaying in the wind. But I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that it wasn't. Someone or something was in my house. I almost turned around, almost got back in my car and drove away. But a combination of stubborn disbelief in the supernatural and concern for my property pushed me forward. I unlocked the door, switching on lights as I entered. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the entryway. "Is someone here?" Silence greeted me, but it felt weighted, as if the house itself were holding its breath. I moved from room to room on the ground floor, turning on every light, checking closets and behind doors, finding nothing out of place. Then, from upstairs came the sound of footsteps. Light, quick steps that might have belonged to a child. I stood at the foot of the stairs, looking up into the darkness of the second floor. "Emily," I said softly, the name feeling strange on my lips. "Emily Winters, is that you?" The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then a whisper, so faint I might have imagined it. "He won't let us leave." A chill ran down my spine. "Who won't let you leave?" I asked, taking a step up the staircase. No answer came. Instead, the temperature in the hallway plummeted suddenly, my breath fogging in the air. And then, from every corner of the house, the whispers began again. Dozens of voices overlapping, some pleading, some angry, all desperate. "Trapped here. The shadows take you. He's coming. Run." I stumbled backward, nearly falling. The voices rose in volume, filling my head until I could barely think. And with them came the shadows, sliding down the walls, across the floor, moving with purpose and malevolence. They were no longer just shapeless patches of darkness. As I watched in horror, they began to form into silhouettes, human-like but wrong somehow, elongated and twisted, their edges vibrating. With a terrible energy, they converged at the foot of the stairs, blocking my retreat, and began to climb toward me. I turned and ran up the stairs, my only thought to get away from those advancing shadows. I reached the second floor and raced down the hall to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me and leaning against it, gasping for breath. The room was cold, much colder than it should have been, and it wasn't empty. A small figure stood by the window, a little girl in a nightgown, her back to me. Her dark hair hung lank down her back, and she seemed to be looking out at something in the yard. Emily. My voice was barely a whisper. Slowly, she turned. Her face was pale and drawn, her eyes dark hollows that reflected no light. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice a dry rustle like dead leaves. "Now he knows you're afraid." "Who?" I asked, still pressed against the door, feeling the wood vibrate as something on the other side began to thump against it. "Your father?" She shook her head, a sad smile touching her bloodless lips. "Not my father. He came with the house. He was always here in the walls, in the shadows. He made my father do those things, and now he'll make you do things too." The thumping at the door grew more insistent. Wood splintered around the hinges. "How do I stop it?" I pleaded. "Tell me how to help you, how to help all of you." "You can't," Emily said simply. "No one can. We stay here. We always stay here. And soon you'll stay too." The door burst open behind me and I whirled around, expecting to see the shadow figures. Instead, there was only darkness, a darkness deeper and more complete than any natural absence of light. It surged forward like a living thing, enveloping me in cold that burned my skin and stole my breath. Within that darkness, I could feel a presence, ancient, malevolent, hungry. It pressed against my mind, seeking entrance, whispering promises and threats in a language I almost understood. I fought against it, clinging to my sense of self, to my memories and identity. But it was strong, so strong, and I was tired and afraid. "Please," I gasped, though I didn't know who I was pleading with. "Please." And then, as suddenly as it had come, the darkness receded. The room returned to normal. Just my bedroom, with its peeling wallpaper and heavy curtains. Emily was gone. The house was quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed, trembling, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had I hallucinated the whole thing? Was I having some kind of breakdown like Martin Winters before me? But I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. There was something in this house, something that had been here for generations, feeding on fear and pain and death. I couldn't stay here. That much was clear. I would go to Elaine's for the night, then figure out what to do about the house. Perhaps there was a way to cleanse it, to free the spirits trapped within its walls. Or perhaps I would have to walk away, lose my investment, start over somewhere else. I threw some clothes into a bag and headed downstairs, keeping the lights on as I went. The house seemed normal again, quiet and still, but I didn't trust the silence. At the front door, I hesitated, looking back at the home I'd been so excited to own just a week ago. Now its charm seemed like a mask, hiding something rotten beneath. As I turned to leave, my gaze fell on the study door, which stood slightly ajar. I was certain I had closed it earlier, telling myself I was just checking that I hadn't left any. Papers out. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The room was dark except for a single shaft of moonlight falling across my desk. And there, illuminated in that pale glow, was another child's drawing. This one showed the same house, but now there were more shadows, dozens of them, pressing against every window and door. And in one of the upstairs windows, two figures, one small, one adult-sized. I snatched up the drawing, my heart pounding. It hadn't been there when I left for work that morning. Someone or something had left it for me to find. As I stared at the crude figures in the window, I realized, with growing horror, that the adult figure was wearing clothes identical to what I had on right now. The drawing wasn't just of any adult, it was specifically of me. A cold certainty settled over me. Whatever force dwelled in this house, it had marked me, it knew me, and it had no intention of letting me leave. Behind me, the study door swung, shut with a soft click, and from the shadows in every corner of the room, the whispers began again. "Welcome home, Jacob. Welcome home." I jerked around, scanning the darkened corners of the study. There was no one there, but the whispers continued, seeming to come from the very walls themselves. "You're not real," I said aloud, my voice shaking. "None of this is real." A soft laugh answered me, not Emily's childish giggle, but something deeper, older, something that had perhaps never been human at all. I lunged for the door, twisting the knob frantically, but it wouldn't budge. I was locked in, trapped with whatever entity was manifesting in the shadows that now seemed to be, leaching from the corners, pooling on the floor like spilled ink. My phone. I could call for help. I pulled it from my pocket with trembling fingers, but there was no signal, not even a single bar. The screen flickered and went dark, as if the battery had suddenly drained. The temperature in the room plummeted again, and I could see my breath clouding in front of me. The shadows continued to spread across the floor, reaching for my feet like grasping hands. And then, as I pressed my back against the door, a figure began to form in the center of the room, coalescing from the darkness, taking on dimension and substance. It was roughly human in shape, but too tall, too thin, its proportions subtly wrong in a way that made my mind recoil. Its face, if it could be called that, was a blank expanse with two deep hollows where eyes should be. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady despite the terror coursing through me. The figure tilted its head, regarding me with those empty eye sockets. When it spoke, its voice was a chorus of whispers, as if many voices were speaking in unison. "Your fear," it said, "your despair, your surrender, just as we have taken from all who dwell within these walls." "The Winters family," I managed to say. "You made Martin kill his wife and daughter." A sound like rustling leaves. Laughter, I realized with horror. Martin was weak. He broke too quickly. But there have been others over the years. Some fought. Longer. Some, like you, tried to leave. The figure drifted closer, the shadows around it writhing like living things. None succeeded. My mind raced. If I couldn't escape physically, perhaps there was another way. "Why do you keep them here? Emily, the others. Why not let them go?" The shadow being paused, its featureless face somehow conveying surprise. "They are sustenance," it said simply. "Their pain, their fear, their memories. They feed us, as you will feed us, Jacob Reynolds, as you already begin to feed us with your terror." I thought of Emily's sad eyes, her warning. I thought of the whispers in the walls, the countless souls trapped in this house across decades, perhaps centuries. And I thought of my own stubborn certainty that I could make a home here, that I could start anew in this place of death and darkness. "No," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I won't be your food, and I won't let you keep them here either." The shadow figure seemed to expand, growing larger as it loomed over me. "You have no choice," it hissed, the multiple voices becoming discordant, angry. "You are already ours. The moment you crossed the threshold, your fate was sealed." There's always a choice, I insisted, though I had no idea what that choice might be. I was stalling, desperately trying to think of a way out. And then, as if in answer to my unspoken plea, I felt a small cold hand slip into mine. I looked down to see Emily standing beside me, her form translucent in the dim light, but her touch real enough. "There is a way," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the shadow being. "But it comes with a price." The entity surged forward, its shadowy appendages reaching for the girl. "Silence," it commanded. "You know nothing." But Emily stood her ground, her grip on my hand tightening. "The attic," she said quickly. "In the attic there's a..." Before she could finish, the shadows engulfed her, pulling her away from me. I heard her cry out once before she vanished, absorbed into the writhing darkness. The attic. Whatever secret she had been about to reveal, it was in the attic. I had yet to explore that space, assuming it was just storage like in most old houses, but now it seemed it might hold the key to understanding what was happening, and possibly how to stop it. I had to get out of this room first. The shadow entity was still between me and the door, its form rippling with what I could only interpret as rage. It seemed distracted by whatever it was doing to Emily, giving me perhaps my only chance. I lunged to the side, diving for the window. The heavy curtains tangled around me as I struggled to find the latch. Behind me, I could feel the cold presence of the entity moving closer, the whispers rising to a roar in my ears. My fingers found the latch, and I threw the window open, gasping at the rush of night air. Without hesitation, I climbed through, grateful that the study was on the ground floor. I tumbled onto the unkempt lawn, scrambling to my feet as the window behind me slammed shut with enough force to shatter the glass. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, and nearly wept with relief when the engine started. As I backed out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of the house, every window now filled with pressing shadows, and among them, pale faces watching me go. Emily was at my bedroom window, her small hand raised in what might have been a farewell or a warning. I drove to Elaine's house on autopilot, my mind struggling to process what had happened. She opened the door in her pajamas, one look at my face telling her everything she needed to know. "Come in," she said, ushering me inside. "Brian's away on business. You can stay as long as you need." I collapsed on her couch, the events of the evening pouring out of me in a confused jumble. To her credit, Elaine didn't interrupt or tell me I was crazy. She listened, made coffee, and when I was done, she simply asked, "What are you going to do now?" "I have to go back," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. Not to live there, never to live there again, but there's something in the attic, something Emily wanted me to find. If there's any chance it could help free her, free all of them. "Jake, listen to yourself," Elaine said gently. "Ghosts? Shadows that come alive? Are you sure this isn't some kind of, I don't know, stress reaction? After everything with Claire and the move." I shook my head. "I know how it sounds. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't experienced it myself. But Elaine, I saw them. I felt them. And that little girl, she's been trapped there since 1987. I can't just walk away." "Then I'm coming with you," she said firmly. "Whatever's happening, you shouldn't face it alone." We agreed to go the next day in broad daylight. I spent a restless night on Elaine's couch, my dreams filled with shadows that spoke with many voices and a little girl who couldn't find her way home. In the morning, the house looked almost normal, its Victorian charm evident in the clear autumn light. But as we approached the front door, I could feel Elaine's hesitation. "Maybe we should call someone," she suggested. "A priest or, I don't know, one of those paranormal investigation teams." "There's no time," I said, inserting my key in the lock. "And I'm not sure they could help anyway. Whatever's in this house, It's been here for generations, hiding its true nature from the outside world. The door swung open, revealing the familiar entryway. Everything was as I had left it the night before. Lights still on, my bag of hastily packed clothes still on the floor where I had dropped it in my rush to escape. "It seems normal enough," Elaine said, stepping inside and looking around. "Creaky, but that's to be expected in a house this old." "It hides itself," I replied, scanning the shadows in the corners, half expecting to see them move. "It waits until you're comfortable, until you start to doubt your own experiences. Then it shows itself." We moved through the house cautiously, Elaine's skepticism evident in her expression, but her concern for me keeping her by my side. The attic access was in the hallway ceiling on the second floor, a trapdoor with a pull-down ladder that took both of us to coax open. "I'll go first," I said, placing my foot on the bottom where I'll continue with part 2 of The Whispering Shadows, the next section of our psychological horror story about the house where shadows speak and secrets never stay buried. Placed my foot on the bottom rung of the ladder, testing it to ensure it would hold my weight. The wood creaked but seemed sturdy enough. As I climbed, dust rained down, dancing in the shafts of light filtering through the small window at the far end of the attic. "Be careful," Elaine called from below, her voice tight with concern. The attic air was thick and stale, carrying the musty scent of decades-old neglect. I pulled myself up through the opening, coughing as dust filled my lungs. The space was larger than I had expected. Running the entire length of the house, its sloped ceiling making me stoop slightly as I moved away from the entrance to make room for Elaine. "What exactly are we looking for?" she asked as she joined, me brushing cobwebs from her sleeve. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Emily just said there was something in the attic. Something important." The attic was crowded with the abandoned possessions of previous owners. Old trunks, furniture draped in yellowed sheets, cardboard boxes that had begun to collapse under their own weight. Sunlight streamed through the single window, illuminating motes of dust that swirled in the air with our movements. "We should start searching," I said, moving toward a stack of boxes. "There's got to be something here that can tell us about the house, about whatever is keeping those spirits trapped." Elaine nodded, though I could see she was still struggling to believe what I had told her. She began examining an old dresser, while I turned my attention to a trunk that sat directly beneath the window. The trunk was made of dark wood, banded with iron that had rusted over time. It was locked, but the lock was old and brittle, breaking easily when I applied pressure. Inside were papers yellowed with age and what appeared to be journals bound in cracked leather. "I think I found something," I called to Elaine, lifting out the topmost journal. The leather cover was worn smooth in places, as if it had been handled often. Opening it carefully, I found pages filled with a neat, precise handwriting. The date on the first entry was June 17, 1873. "This belonged to Thaddeus Blackwood," I said, scanning the first few lines. "The man who built this house." Elaine came to look over my shoulder, her skepticism momentarily forgotten in the face of this historical discovery. "What does it say?" I began to read aloud. "The construction of the house is complete at last, though not without cost. 3 workers lost to accidents that cannot be explained by natural means. The land resists our presence, I am certain of it. But the location was too perfect to abandon. The convergence of ley lines precisely where the old maps indicated." "Ley lines?" Elaine frowned. "Isn't that some kind of pseudoscientific thing about energy paths in the earth?" "It was a popular concept in certain occult circles in the 19th century, I said, continuing to scan the journal. "Blackwood seems to have been involved in some kind of esoteric research. Listen to this. The chamber beneath the foundation is prepared according to the ancient texts. The symbols are carved into the cornerstone, invisible to those who do not No, to look for them. Tonight, when the moon is dark, we will begin the working. A chill ran through me despite the stuffiness of the attic. I think Thaddeus Blackwood built this house for a specific purpose, some kind of ritual. I turned the pages, skimming through entries that detailed everyday life interspersed with cryptic references to the working and the entity. Blackwood's handwriting grew increasingly erratic as the journal progressed, his once neat script becoming a desperate scrawl. October 31st, 1873, I read. We have succeeded beyond our wildest expectations, yet I am filled with dread. The entity has crossed the threshold, drawn by our offerings. It promised knowledge, power beyond mortal understanding, but I fear we have invited something far darker than we intended. It speaks through the shadows now, whispering secrets that no man should know. Hawkins fled after the ritual, calling me a madman. Perhaps he is right. This is insane, Elaine said, her voice barely above a whisper. You think he... what? Summoned something? A demon? I shook my head. I don't know. But whatever it was, I think it's still here. It's what's keeping all those spirits trapped. And look at this. I pointed to a later entry dated November 15th, 1873. The entity requires sustenance. It feeds on fear, on suffering. I cannot control it as I had hoped. It moves freely through the house now, manipulating the shadows to its will. Last night I found it in Edward's room, standing over my son's bed, drawing something from him as he slept. A kind of light that seemed to emanate from his very being. The boy is pale and listless this morning, complaining of nightmares. I have made a terrible mistake. The journal continued, chronicling Blackwood's growing horror as he realized what he had unleashed. His wife became ill, wasting away as the entity fed on her. His children suffered from terrible nightmares and mysterious bruises. Servants fled, spreading rumors about the cursed house on Blackwood Lane. The final entry, dated January 3rd, 1874, read simply, I have failed to banish it. The price is too high. My family, my sanity. God forgive me for what I have done. So this entity has been here since the beginning, I said, closing the journal, feeding on the fear and suffering of everyone who's lived here. That's why the spirits can't leave. It's keeping them here, using them as a perpetual food source. But what is it? Elaine asked. And how do we stop it? I reached back into the trunk, pulling out more papers. Among them was a folded parchment that crackled as I carefully opened it. It was a diagram of sorts showing the layout of the house with strange symbols inscribed at key points. I think this is how Blackwood summoned it, I said, studying the diagram. These symbols, they're at specific points in the house. The corners, the hearths, the thresholds. He created a kind of cage, a habitat for this thing. Elaine leaned shorter. So if these symbols are what's keeping it here, then destroying them might free it. Or banish it, I finished. But we'd have to find them all, and they could be anywhere, under floorboards, inside walls. Wait, Elaine said suddenly, pointing to a word scrawled at the bottom of the diagram. What's that? I squinted at the faded ink. Cornerstone. It says, the binding is in the cornerstone. We looked at each other, understanding dawning simultaneously. The foundation, I said. Blackwood mentioned a chamber beneath the foundation, the cornerstone with the symbols carved into it. So we need to find this chamber, Elaine said. But where would it be? The basement? I nodded. It's our best bet. If the binding that's keeping the entity here is in the cornerstone, that's where we need to go. As if in response to our discovery, a cold draft swept through the attic, stirring the dust and rustling the pages of the open journal. The sunlight streaming through the window dimmed, as if something had passed between the house and the sun. It knows, I whispered. It knows what we've found. The temperature dropped suddenly, our breath visible in the chilled air. From the corners of the attic, shadows began to seep like liquid darkness, pooling and spreading across the floor toward us. We need to go, I said, grabbing the journal and diagram. Now. We scrambled toward the attic access, but the shadows moved faster, converging at the opening. As they met, they began to rise, forming that same tall, thin figure I had seen the night before. You seek knowledge that is not meant for you, it said in that chorus of whispers. The binding is mine, the house is mine, and soon you will be mine as well. Elaine gasped beside me, her skepticism shattered by the undeniable presence before us. Oh my God, she breathed. It's real. It's all real. The shadow figure seemed to grow larger, feeding on her fear. Its arm-like appendages stretched toward us, the darkness at its core deepening until it seemed like a tear in the fabric of reality. Run, I shouted, pulling Elaine toward the far end of the attic. There had to be another way out. Old houses like this often had multiple access points to the attic for maintenance. We stumbled over boxes and forgotten furniture, the shadow entity gliding after us with unnatural fluidity. At the far end of the attic, partially hidden behind a large armoire, we found what we were looking for. A second trapdoor. Help me with this, I gasped, pushing against the armoire. Together, we managed to move it enough to access the door. The entity was just feet away now, the cold intensifying as it approached. I yanked on the trapdoor's handle and it opened with a groan of protest, revealing a narrow staircase leading down. Without hesitation, we descended, closing the door behind us. The staircase was pitch black, but I kept one hand on the wall and the other gripping Elaine's arm as we made our way down. We emerged into a small bedroom that I had never seen before, a room that, according to the layout of the house, I knew shouldn't exist. It was furnished simply with a bed, a dresser, and a rocking chair by the window. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, untouched for decades. Where are we? Elaine whispered. This room wasn't on the real estate listing. I don't know, I said, but we need to get to the basement. That's where the cornerstone will be. We moved to the door, opening it cautiously. It led to a narrow hallway that connected to the main second-floor corridor. As we stepped out, I heard a familiar sound that made my blood run cold. A child's laughter echoing from somewhere nearby. Emily? I called softly. The laughter stopped. Then, from the darkness at the end of the hall, a small figure appeared. Emily looked different in the daylight. More solid, more real, though her feet still didn't quite touch the floor as she approached. You found it, she said, her voice a mix of hope and fear. Blackwood's journal. I tried to show others, but it always stops me. The entity, I said. It feeds on fear, on souls, that's why you're all trapped here. Emily nodded, her eyes darting nervously to the shadows that seemed to be gathering at the edges of our vision. The cornerstone is the key. It binds the entity to this place, but it also binds us. If you break it, we can free you, I finished. Or, really something worse, she warned. The entity is contained in a way, restricted to this house and its grounds. If you break the binding, a distant howling sound cut through the house like wind through a narrow gap, but with an undertone of rage that was unmistakably sentient. It's coming, Emily said urgently. Go to the basement. Find the chamber. Do what you must, but be careful. It will try to stop you. She began to fade, her form becoming transparent. I can hold it off, distract it, but not for long. Emily, wait. I called, but she was already gone, leaving only a faint chill in the air where she had stood. "Come on," Elaine urged, tugging at my arm. "We need to move." We raced down the stairs to the first floor. The house had taken on an ominous silence, as if holding its breath. The basement door was in the kitchen, a heavy oak door with an old-fashioned iron latch. As I reached for it, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness except for the gray daylight filtering through the windows. From upstairs came a crash, followed by that same howling sound, louder now. "It's fighting with Emily," I said, fumbling with the latch in the dim light. "She's buying us time." The door finally swung open, revealing a set of steep stairs descending into absolute darkness. I pulled out my phone, turning on its flashlight function. "Stay close," I told Elaine, who had gone pale but nodded resolutely. The basement was cold and damp, the rough stone walls glistening with moisture. Our breath clouded in front of us as we moved deeper into the space, the beam of light from my phone casting long, twisted shadows. The main area of the basement was cluttered with the usual detritus: old paint cans, tools, a disused water heater. But at the far end, partially obscured by a stack of lumber, was another door, smaller, made of metal that had oxidized to a dull green. "There," I said, pointing. "That has to be it." As we approached, the temperature dropped further. My phone's light began to flicker, its battery draining visibly despite being fully charged when we entered the house. The metal door was secured with a padlock that had rusted solid over the years. I looked around, spotting a crowbar leaning against the wall. With Elaine holding the failing phone light, I worked the crowbar into the hasp of the padlock, straining against decades of corrosion. With a sound like a gunshot, the padlock finally broke. The door swung inward on surprisingly well-oiled hinges, revealing a chamber beyond. The space was small, perhaps 10 feet square, its walls covered in symbols similar to those on the diagram we had found. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, and on that pedestal rested a cube of dark stone approximately a foot on each side. The cornerstone. Every surface of the cube was carved with intricate symbols that seemed to shift and change as we looked at them. The stone itself appeared to absorb the light from my phone, the beam dimming as I directed it toward the cornerstone. "This is it," I breathed. "The binding." We approached cautiously. As we got closer, I could feel a vibration emanating from the stone, a low hum that resonated in my chest. The air around the pedestal shimmered as if we were looking through heat waves. "What do we do?" Elaine asked, her voice barely audible over the humming. Before I could answer, a furious howl ripped through the house so loud it shook dust from the ceiling. The lights on my phone died completely, leaving us in darkness broken only by a faint, sickly glow emanating from the symbols on the cornerstone. "We have to break it," I said, feeling my way back to where I had dropped the crowbar. "It's the only way to free the spirits." "But what about the entity?" Elaine's voice was tight with fear. "Emily said it could be worse if it's released." I hesitated, crowbar in hand. She was right. We had no idea what would happen if we destroyed the cornerstone. Would the entity be banished, or would it be freed from its last constraints? Would the spirits move on, or would they be consumed entirely? The decision was taken from us as the door to the chamber slammed shut, trapping us inside. The temperature plummeted to freezing, our breath coming in white plumes in the eerie glow of the stone. The shadows in the corners of the room began to move, coalescing into that now familiar figure. Tall, thin, wrong. But this time, it wasn't alone. Behind it, I could make out other shapes, dozens of them, pale and translucent, the trapped spirits of all who had died in the house. "So many," Elaine whispered in horror. There are so many of them. I could see Emily among them, her small form standing slightly apart. She looked directly at me, her expression unreadable in the dim light. The entity moved forward, its form seeming larger and more substantial than before. "You cannot break the binding," it said, the chorus of whispers now a harsh, grating sound. "It sustains me. It contains me. It is me." Understanding dawned. The cornerstone wasn't just binding the entity to the house. It was part of the entity itself, a physical anchor for something that existed primarily in another realm. "If we destroy it," I said slowly, "we destroy you." The shadows rippled, an expression of rage or fear. It was impossible to tell. "You will join the others," it hissed. "Your fear will feed me for eternity." It surged forward, the cold intensifying until it burned my skin. I raised the crowbar instinctively, stepping backward until I bumped against the pedestal, and then Emily moved. Her ghostly form darted forward, placing herself between us and the entity. "No more," she said, her voice stronger than I had heard it before. "No more fear. No more feeding." Other spirits moved forward to join her. Men, women, children, their faces set with the same determination. They formed a barrier between us and the entity, their combined presence creating a soft light that pushed back the darkness. "Now," Emily called to me. "Break it now," the entity roared, pushing against the wall of spirits, but they held firm. I could see the effort it cost them, their forms flickering like candles in a draft. I didn't hesitate this time. Raising the crowbar high, I brought it down with all my strength on the cornerstone. The impact sent a shock wave through the room. Cracks appeared in the dark stone, spreading like lightning across its surface. The symbols carved into it began to glow with an intense, painful brightness. "Again!" Emily urged. I struck again and again, each blow widening the cracks, the humming from the stone rising to a shriek that threatened to shatter my eardrums. The entity's form was fluctuating wildly now, stretching and contracting as if in agony. "Stop," it commanded, its many voices discordant and desperate. "You know not what you do." One final blow, and the cornerstone split in two, the pieces falling to either side of the pedestal. There was a moment of absolute silence, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Then the explosion came, not of fire or sound, but of darkness. It burst from the broken stone like a tidal wave, engulfing the room, the house, perhaps the entire world. I felt myself lifted and thrown, Elaine's hand torn from mine. For what seemed like an eternity, there was only darkness and cold and the sensation of falling through endless space. Then, abruptly, impact, hard and painful, against what felt like the basement floor. I gasped for breath, the air rushing back into my lungs in a painful surge. Slowly, my vision began to return, revealing the basement around me. Ordinary now, the metal door gone as if it had never existed, the wall behind it solid stone. "Elaine?" I called, my voice hoarse. "Here," she responded from somewhere to my left. "I'm here. Are you okay?" I took inventory. Bruised, shaken, but essentially intact. "I think so. What happened?" We found each other in the dim light filtering down from the kitchen doorway. Elaine looked as dazed as I felt, her clothes dusty, a small cut on her forehead, trickling blood. "The cornerstone," I said. "We broke it. But where did the entity go and the spirits?" As if in answer, a warm breeze swept through the basement, incongruous in the cold, damp space. It carried with it a whisper that might have been, "Thank you," and the faint, fading sound of a child's laughter. We made our way upstairs on shaky legs, The house felt different, lighter somehow. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. Sunlight streamed through the windows unimpeded, illuminating rooms that had seemed perpetually shadowed before. "Do you think it worked?" Elaine asked as we stood in the kitchen looking around at the ordinary domestic space. "Are they free?" "I think so," I said. "I think the entity was bound to the cornerstone, and when we destroyed it, it was destroyed too," she finished, "and the spirits it was holding here could move on." I nodded. "That's my hope anyway." We searched the rest of the house, finding no sign of Emily or any of the other spirits. No moving shadows, no unexplained cold spots. The house was just a house now, old, in need of work, but free of the malevolence that had permeated its very structure. "What will you do now?" Elaine asked as we sat on the front steps, exhausted by our ordeal. "You can't seriously be thinking of living here after what happened." I looked back at the house, considering. Now that the entity was gone, there was no rational reason not to live here. The structure was sound, the location good, the price still unbeatable, but the memories of what had occurred within those walls would always remain. "I think I'll sell it," I said finally. "Make sure the new owners know nothing about its history. Now that the entity is gone, there's no reason anyone else should have problems here." Elaine nodded, relief evident on her face. "You can stay with me until you find a new place." "Thanks," I said, standing up. "Let's get out of here. I've had enough of this house to last a lifetime." As we walked to the car, I couldn't resist one last look back at the Victorian on Blackwood Lane. For an instant, I thought I saw a small figure at one of the upstairs windows, a little girl with sad eyes raising her hand in farewell. But when I blinked, there was nothing there but sunlight reflecting on glass. Perhaps Emily had moved on with the others. Perhaps she was finally at peace. Or perhaps, I thought with a shiver, some echoes never completely fade away. The week that followed was a blur of practical matters, contacting a realtor, arranging for my belongings to be moved to storage, staying in Elaine's guest room while I searched for a new apartment. I told the realtor there had been a family emergency, that I could no longer afford the house. She was sympathetic, assuring me that with the market as it was, she could sell it quickly. I said nothing about what had really happened. Who would believe me? Even Elaine, who had experienced it firsthand, had begun to rationalize it, suggesting gas leaks or carbon monoxide as possible explanations for our shared hallucination. I didn't argue with her. It was easier for her to believe in tangible dangers than to accept that for a brief time, she had glimpsed something beyond the veil of ordinary reality. But I knew what we had seen, what we had done. And late at night, when sleep eluded me, I would find myself thinking about Emily and the others, hoping they had found whatever peace awaited them beyond this world. 10 days after our confrontation in the basement, the realtor called with news. She had a buyer, a young couple relocating from out of state for work. They loved the charm and character of the house and were prepared to make a generous offer, well above what I had paid. "It's almost like they were meant to find it," the realtor gushed. "Such a perfect match." I hesitated, a flicker of concern running through me. Had we truly banished the entity? Or had we merely disrupted its connection to the house temporarily? Would this young couple find themselves experiencing the same horrors that had driven the Winters family to their deaths? But then I remembered the feeling as we left that day, the lightness, the sense of release. The house had been cleansed. I was certain of it, and I needed the money to start over. "Tell them I accept," I said. The closing was set for the following week. I would need to go back to the house one last time, to collect any remaining belongings and sign the final paperwork. I wasn't looking forward to it, but I told myself it would be fine. The shadows no longer held any power there. The night before the closing, I dreamed of the house. In the dream, I was wandering through rooms that shifted and changed, corridors that stretched endlessly, looking for something, though I didn't know what. The house was empty of furniture, of people, of spirits, but not of presence. Something still lingered there, something that knew me, that waited for me. I woke in a cold sweat, the details of the dream already fading, but the unease lingering. It was just a dream, I told myself. Natural anxiety about returning to a place where I had experienced trauma. The day was bright and clear as I drove to Blackwood Lane for the final time. The house looked benign in the morning light, its Victorian architecture charming rather than ominous. The realtor's car was already in the driveway, along with another I assumed belonged to the buyers. As I approached the front door, I heard voices from inside, the realtor's professional cheerfulness, a man's deeper tones, a woman's laugh, normal sounds, human sounds. I rang the doorbell, putting on my best approximation of a relaxed smile as the realtor opened the door. "Jacob," she exclaimed. "Perfect timing. Come in, meet the Calders." The young couple was everything you might expect. He in a business casual ensemble that suggested a tech job, she stylishly pregnant in a flowy dress. They greeted me warmly, asking questions about the neighborhood, the utilities, all the mundane concerns of home buyers. "We're just so thrilled," Sarah Calder said, one hand resting on her rounded belly. "This house is exactly what we've been looking for. All this space and such character. It'll be perfect for raising a family." I felt a flicker of unease at her words. A family. A child growing up in these rooms where Emily Winters had died in terror. But the sunlight streaming through the windows was warm and bright, the shadows just ordinary shadows. "It's a great house," I said, the lie coming easily. "Just not right for me at this time in my life." We toured the house together, the realtor pointing out features I had never fully appreciated during my brief tenancy. The Calders oohed and awed appropriately, making plans for each room. This one would be the nursery, that one a home office. The large bedroom upstairs would of course be theirs. As we reached the second floor, I found myself drawn to the window at the end of the hall. The window where I had last seen or thought I had seen Emily's ghostly figure. The glass was clean and clear, reflecting nothing but the blue sky outside. "Beautiful view, isn't it?" Sarah said, coming to stand beside me. "You can see all the way to the park from here." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She couldn't know that I was looking for phantoms, not scenery. "Did you feel it too?" she asked suddenly, her voice low. I turned to her, startled. "Feel what?" Her hand moved in a vague gesture. "Something about this house, like it was waiting for us. Rick thinks I'm being fanciful, pregnancy hormones, and all that. But from the moment we stepped inside, I felt like it knew us somehow." A chill ran through me despite the warm air. "What do you mean, knew you?" Sarah shrugged, looking embarrassed. "It's silly, I know. Just a feeling. Like the house has been here all this time, waiting for us to find it, to make it a home again." She smiled, her hand returning to her belly. "We're having a girl, you know. We're going to call her Emily." The name hit me like a physical blow. I must have swayed on my feet because Sarah reached out, concerned. "Are you all right? You've gone quite pale." "Fine," I managed. "Just haven't eaten today. Low blood sugar." She nodded sympathetically, but her eyes remained curious. Before she could question me further, the realtor called from downstairs that the paperwork was ready. The signing process was mercifully brief. Soon I was shaking hands with the Calders, wishing them happiness in their new home, walking away from the house on Blackwood Lane for what I sincerely hoped was the last time. As I reached my car, I couldn't resist one final look back. The house stood serene in the midday sun, its windows gleaming, its Victorian details charming rather than menacing. And there, at the upstairs window where I had stood with Sarah Calder just minutes before, was a shadow. Small, child-sized, gone so quickly I might have imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. Some things linger, even when the source of their pain is gone. Some bonds transcend death, transcend time. I wondered if Sarah's daughter, little Emily Calder, would hear whispers in the walls, feel the presence of another Emily who had once lived and died in those rooms. I wondered if the house had truly been waiting for them, if some purpose I couldn't comprehend was still unfolding within those walls, but it was no longer my concern. I had done what I could. I had broken the binding that held the entity, freed the spirits it had trapped. If something still remained, some echo, some memory, it was beyond my power to address. I got in my car and drove away, leaving the house on Blackwood Lane and its shadows behind me. Or so I thought. It was 3 months later when the dreams began again. I had settled into a new apartment, resumed teaching, begun to put the experience behind me. The dreams came without warning, vivid nightmares in which I wandered the halls of the house on Blackwood Lane, pursued by shadows that whispered my name, searching for something I could never find. I would wake gasping, the darkness of my bedroom suddenly threatening, every shadow potentially animate. And then came the night I dreamed not of the house, but of Sarah Calder. In the dream, she stood in the nursery they had planned. Her face, pale and drawn, dark circles under her eyes. She was holding a baby, singing a lullaby in a cracked, desperate voice. And around her, the shadows gathered, watching, waiting. I woke with a certainty that transcended rational thought. Something was wrong at the house on Blackwood Lane. The entity wasn't gone. Or if it was, something else had taken its place. Something equally hungry, equally patient. For days I tried to ignore the feeling. I told myself it was just stress, just the lingering trauma of my experience. The house was cleansed. The spirits were free. There was nothing more to be done. But the dreams continued, growing more vivid, more urgent. Sarah Calder's face becoming more haggard with each vision, the shadows around her darker, closer. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, I drove to Blackwood Lane. It was evening, the streetlights just coming on as I parked across from the house. From the outside, all seemed normal. Lights glowing warmly in the windows, a new wreath on the front door, a few moving boxes still visible on the porch. I sat there for nearly an hour, watching, unsure what I was looking for but unable to leave. As the night deepened, most of the lights in the house went out until only a single lamp burned in an upstairs room. The nursery, I guessed. And then I saw it, a shadow against the curtained window, too tall, too thin to be human. It stood motionless for a long moment, then seemed to turn, as if looking directly at me across the street. The streetlight above my car flickered and went out. In the sudden darkness, I felt rather than saw movement around me, shadows detaching from the night, approaching my car with purpose. The temperature plummeted, my breath clouding in the air. Without conscious thought, I started the engine and drove away, hands shaking on the wheel. In my rearview mirror, I could see them. Darker patches in the night flowing across the street toward the retreating taillights of my car. I didn't stop until I reached Elaine's house, bursting in with a story she clearly didn't want to believe, but couldn't entirely dismiss given what she had experienced herself. "We have to do something," I insisted. "Sarah and her baby, they're in danger. Whatever was in that house, it's not gone. It's still there, still hungry. What can we do?" Elaine asked practically. Call the police, tell them there are evil shadows in the house, they'll think we're crazy. We have to warn them at least, the Calders. They have a right to know what they're dealing with. But when we called the number from the closing paperwork the next morning, it was disconnected. A visit to the house revealed a for sale sign already. In the yard, the windows dark and empty. The realtor, when I finally tracked her down, was reluctant to discuss the Calders. They decided the house wasn't right for them after all, she said, not meeting my eyes. Sometimes these things happen. Did something happen to them? I pressed. To Sarah? The baby? I'm not at liberty to discuss the personal details of clients, she said stiffly. The house is back on the market, that's all I can tell you. But her eyes told a different story. Fear, concern, the desperate desire to forget something she had seen or heard. I left her office more convinced than ever that the nightmare wasn't over. That night I dreamed again of the house, but this time it wasn't Sarah Calder who moved through its rooms. It was me. In the dream, I knew I had returned to finish what I had started, to end the haunting once and for all. The shadows whispered around me, but they no longer seemed threatening. Instead, they were guiding me, showing me what I needed to see. In the basement, beyond where the chamber had been, the dream me discovered a hidden space, a crawl space beneath the foundation that we had missed in our previous exploration. And there, in that confined space, was another stone, smaller than the cornerstone but carved with the same shifting symbols, a secondary binding, a failsafe that Thaddeus Blackwood had created in case the first was ever destroyed. I woke with the absolute conviction that the dream was more than just a dream. It was a message, a revelation of something I had missed. The entity wasn't gone because it had never been fully unbound. Part of it remained anchored to the second stone, waiting, gathering strength. Elaine thought I was losing my mind when I told her I needed to go back to the house, to check the basement again. Perhaps I was. But I knew with unshakable certainty that if I didn't, the cycle would continue. New owners would move in, experience. I'll continue with part 3 of The Whispering Shadows, the next section of our psychological horror story about the house where shadows speak and secrets never stay buried. I knew with unshakable certainty that if I didn't return to the house, the cycle would continue. New owners would move in, experience the terror, flee or die, and the process would repeat endlessly. The entity, or what remained of it, would continue to feed on fear and suffering, trapping more souls within the walls of the house on Blackwood Lane. You can't seriously be considering breaking into that house, Elaine said, her expression a mixture of concern and disbelief. That's illegal, Jake. You could go to jail. What choice do I have? I paced the length of her living room, unable to contain my restless energy. The Calders are gone. Something happened to them. Something bad enough to make them abandon a house they just bought. If I don't do something, it'll just happen to the next family and the next. Even if you're right about this second stone, how would you find it? You said yourself it's hidden in a crawl space that you only saw in a dream. I ran a hand through my hair, frustration mounting. I don't know, but I have to try. I can't just ignore this. Elaine was quiet for a long moment, watching me with troubled eyes. Finally, she sighed. You're really going to do this, aren't you? No matter what I say. I nodded, grateful that she understood even if she didn't approve. Then I'm coming with you, she said firmly. You're not doing this alone. I started to protest, but the look in her eyes stopped me. She had seen the entity too, had helped destroy the cornerstone. She was as invested in this as I was, whether I liked it or not. All right, I agreed. But we need to be careful, in and out, quickly and quietly, awaiting new buyers, which meant no alarms, no occupants to discover us. Still, breaking into an empty house in a quiet neighborhood carried its own risks. We would need to be discreet. As darkness fell, we drove past the house several times, checking for any signs of security patrols or nosy neighbors. The street was quiet, most houses dark or with just the glow of television screens visible through curtained windows. We parked a block away and approached on foot, sticking to shadows, moving as silently as possible. The for sale sign creaked slightly in the night breeze as we passed it, heading not for the front door but for the back of the house where a basement window might provide less visible access. The window was small, but not impossible to fit through. I used a pocket knife to pry open the old latch, wincing at each scrape and click that sounded thunderous in the quiet night. Finally, it gave way, the window swinging inward. "I'll go first," I whispered, shining a flashlight into the darkness beyond. The beam illuminated the same cluttered basement we had explored months before, now empty of the Calder's belongings but otherwise unchanged. I wriggled through the window, dropping quietly to the concrete floor below, then helped Elaine follow. The basement felt colder than the autumn night outside, our breath visible in the beam of the flashlight. "Where do we start?" Elaine asked, her voice hushed. "This crawl space you saw in your dream, any idea where it might be located?" I shone, the light around, trying to orient myself based on the dream vision. "It was beyond where the chamber was," I said, moving toward the far wall where the metal door had once been, and had disappeared after we destroyed the cornerstone. The wall now appeared solid, rough stone with no sign that a door had ever existed there. I ran my hands over the surface, searching for any hidden mechanism, any loose stones that might conceal an opening. "There's nothing here," Elaine said after several minutes of fruitless searching. Maybe the dream was just a dream. After all, I shook my head, unwilling to accept that. "No, it was real. I'm sure of it. We're just missing something." I expanded my search, examining the floor around the wall, tapping on stones, listening for any hollow sound that might indicate a space beneath. Nothing. Frustration mounting, I stepped back, playing the flashlight beam over the entire basement. There had to be something we were overlooking. In my dream, the crawl space had been beneath the foundation, which meant the floor, I said suddenly. "We need to look at the floor, not the wall." We began a methodical examination of the basement floor, tapping concrete, moving boxes and old furniture, searching for anything that might indicate a hidden space below. It was Elaine who found it, a section of flooring near the corner that sounded slightly different when tapped. "Jake," she called softly, "listen to this." I crouched beside her, tapping the spot she indicated. The sound was subtle but unmistakable, a slightly hollower tone compared to the solid concrete around it. "This is it," I said, excitement and dread mingling in my voice. "But how do we get to it? I don't see any seams, any way to lift this section." We examined the area more closely, running our fingers over the rough concrete. After several minutes, I found what I was looking for, a small indentation, barely noticeable unless you were specifically searching for it. When I pressed it, there was a soft click, and a section of the floor about 3 feet square shifted slightly. "Blackwood was clever," I murmured, working my fingers into the narrow gap to lift the concrete panel. A hidden mechanism. No wonder no one ever found this. The panel was heavy but balanced on some unseen pivot, making it possible for me to swing it up and to the side, revealing a dark space beneath. The beam of my flashlight showed a narrow passage sloping downward, just big enough for a person to crawl through. "I guess this is the crawl space," Elaine said, peering over my shoulder. "Looks tight." "I'll go," I said. "You wait here. If something happens, if I don't come back up in 15 minutes, get out and call for help." She looked like she wanted to argue but nodded reluctantly. "Be careful, Jake." I lay on my stomach at the edge of the opening, shining the light ahead before beginning to ease myself into the passage. It was even tighter than it had appeared, forcing me to wriggle forward on elbows and knees, the rough stone scraping my back. The air was stale and thick with dust, making me cough as I inched forward. The passage descended at a gentle angle for about 20 feet before opening into a small chamber, if it could even be called that. It was more like a bubble in the foundation, perhaps 5 feet in diameter and barely high enough for me to sit up. The beam of my flashlight revealed walls of packed earth reinforced with stone, the ceiling a network of wooden beams that supported the house above. And there, in the center of this hidden space resting on a crude stone pedestal, was what I had come for. A stone cube, smaller than the cornerstone we had destroyed but carved with the same shifting symbols. Unlike the cornerstone, which had been dark and light-absorbing, this stone seemed to glow faintly with an inner light, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. I approached cautiously, the air growing colder as I neared the pedestal. The humming I had felt from the cornerstone was present here too, but muted, as if this stone held only a fraction of the power of the first. A backup, I whispered to myself, understanding Thaddeus Blackwood's strategy. The man had been thorough in his occult workings, creating a failsafe in case his primary binding was ever destroyed. This second stone held enough of the entity to maintain its connection to our world, to keep it partially anchored to the house, even after we had destroyed what we thought was its only tether. I reached out toward the stone, my fingers hovering, inches from its surface. The glow intensified, the symbol shifting more rapidly as if agitated by my presence. I hesitated, suddenly uncertain. What if destroying this stone made things worse? What if it released whatever fragment of the entity remained, rather than banishing it? From somewhere above came a sound that made my blood run cold. A door, slamming, followed by footsteps moving across the floor of the basement. "Elaine," I called softly, hoping it was just my friend shifting position. No answer came. Instead, the footsteps continued, moving deliberately toward the open passage where I had entered this hidden chamber. I had no weapon, nothing to defend myself with except the flashlight. Looking around frantically, my gaze fell on the stone pedestal itself. Perhaps it would serve. Grabbing the glowing stone, I was surprised by how light it felt. Not like stone at all, but something less substantial, as if it were partly in our world and partly elsewhere. I tucked it under my arm and began to back, toward the far side of the chamber, as far from the passage entrance as possible. A shadow fell across the opening, darkening it beyond the natural absence of light. Something was there, blocking the way out. Something that seemed to absorb the beam of my flashlight rather than reflecting it. "I have waited for you to return," came that now familiar chorus of whispers. "I knew you would." The entity, or what remained of it, began to squeeze its way into the chamber, its form fluid and shapeless in the confined space, darkness spreading like spilled oil. "You are persistent," it continued, the whispers echoing strangely in the small chamber. "But futile. Even if you destroy the second binding, I cannot be truly banished. I have existed in this place since before the house was built, before Blackwood sought to use me for his own purposes. I am part of the land itself." "You're lying," I said, pressing my back against the earthen wall. "You're trapped here because of Blackwood's ritual. Without these bindings, you have no anchor in our world." A sound like rustling leaves, that eerie laughter I remembered. "Is that what you believe? Humans always so certain of their understanding. Blackwood did not summon me. He merely gave me form, gave me focus. The bindings do not keep me here. They keep me from being everywhere." The darkness continued to spread, tendrils of shadow reaching toward me, toward the stone I clutched. The cold was intense now, burning my skin, making it difficult to breathe. "Give me the stone," the entity demanded. "It belongs to me, is me. You cannot comprehend what you meddle with." The pressure on my throat vanished. I gasped for air, blinking away the after images, trying to see what had happened. The stone lay in pieces around me, its glow fading rapidly. The chamber was quiet, the oppressive presence seemingly gone. "I know enough," I said, gripping the stone tighter. "I know you feed on fear and suffering. I know you keep souls trapped here to sustain you. That's all I need to know." The darkness lunged forward, and I felt icy fingers wrap around my throat, cutting off my air. My vision began to dim, the flashlight slipping from my grasp to roll across the floor, its beam creating wild shadows as it came to rest. In desperation, I raised the stone above my head and brought it down hard against the edge of the pedestal. There was a sound like crystal shattering and a flash of light so intense it burned through my closed eyelids. Had it worked? Had I banished the entity, or at least weakened it further? I scrambled for the flashlight, its beam now the only light in the darkness. The passage back to the basement was clear, no shadow figure blocking the way. I began to crawl back up the sloping tunnel, moving as quickly as the confined space allowed, driven by a sudden urgent need to reach Elaine, to make sure she was safe. The basement was empty when I emerged, no sign of Elaine or whatever had made those footsteps I'd heard. "Elaine?" I called louder now, fear tightening my chest. No answer came. I crossed to the stairs, taking them two at a time, emerging into the kitchen of the house. It too was empty, silent, normal in the beam of my flashlight. Moving from room to room, I searched the ground floor, calling Elaine's name with increasing desperation. Had she fled when she heard the footsteps? Was she waiting outside, safe? Or had something happened to her? As I reached the front hall, I noticed that the front door stood partially open. Had Elaine left that way? I moved toward it, relief beginning to replace fear. She had probably heard someone coming and escaped, just as we had planned if there was trouble. Then I saw the dark stain on the hardwood floor, a smear leading from the basement door toward the front entrance. In the harsh beam of the flashlight, the color was unmistakable. Blood. "Elaine!" I shouted, abandoning all caution. "Elaine, where are you?" I rushed out onto the porch, looking wildly up and down the street. It was deserted, the night still and quiet except for the distant barking of a dog. The blood trail continued down the porch steps, across the front yard, ending at the sidewalk. There were signs of a struggle, gouges in the lawn, a discarded shoe that I recognized as Elaine's. She hadn't left willingly. Something had taken her, dragged her from the house while I was in that hidden chamber dealing with the entity. But what? The shadow being itself? Or something else? Something human? I stood there in the silent street, flashlight beam playing, uselessly across the empty sidewalk, overwhelmed by helplessness and guilt. I had brought her into this. Whatever had happened to her was my responsibility. A police siren wailed in the distance, growing louder. Someone must have seen the break-in, called the authorities. I couldn't be found here, not with blood on the floor, not with evidence of a struggle and Elaine missing. They would assume the worst. I would become the prime suspect in her disappearance. With one last desperate look around, I ran back to our parked car, my mind racing. I had to find Elaine, but how? Where would I even begin to look? As I drove away, staying just under the speed limit to avoid attention, my thoughts whirled in chaotic spirals. Was Elaine's disappearance connected to the entity? Had destroying the second stone somehow triggered this? Or was it a terrible coincidence? A human predator who had seen our break-in as an opportunity? I returned to Elaine's house, hoping against hope that she might have somehow made it back there. The building was dark and silent, no sign of life. Using the spare key she had given me, I let myself in, calling her name. Only the echo of my own voice answered. I sank onto her couch, head in my hands, trying to think clearly through the fog of fear and guilt. The police would be looking for a burglar at the house on Blackwood Lane now. Soon they would discover Elaine was missing. I would be questioned, suspected. How could I explain what we had been doing there? Who would believe the truth? I needed to find her before the authorities became involved. But where to start? My gaze fell on Elaine's laptop, sitting open on the coffee table. Perhaps there was something there, some clue we had overlooked in our research about the house, about the entity, some hint as to where it might take a victim. I opened the browser history, finding the pages we had consulted about Thaddeus Blackwood and his occult interests. One site caught my attention, a forum dedicated to local legends and supernatural occurrences in the area. Elaine had been reading it just that afternoon, while I was gathering flashlights and tools for our expedition to the house. The thread she had been viewing was titled, "The Blackwood Property, Beyond the House." It discussed not just the Victorian on Blackwood Lane, but the surrounding land that had once belonged to Thaddeus Blackwood, nearly 50 acres, most of which had been sold off and developed over the years. But one section of the original property remained undeveloped, a wooded area about a mile from the house overlooking a small stagnant pond locally known as Blackwood's Pool. According to the forum, the land had been designated as a nature preserve in the 1970s after several attempts to build there had failed due to unexpected complications, foundations that crumbled for no apparent reason, construction equipment that malfunctioned, workers who quit after experiencing uncomfortable sensations on the site. Could this be connected? The entity had claimed to be part of the land itself. What if its true power wasn't centered in the house at all, but in this untouched section of Blackwood's original property? It was a tenuous lead at best, but it was all I had. I needed to check the location to see if there was any sign of Elaine there. And I needed to hurry. Dawn was only a few hours away, and the woods would be easier to search in darkness if whatever I was looking for preferred to hide from the light. I gathered what supplies I could find: a better flashlight, a kitchen, knife, pathetic protection but better than nothing, some water, and a first aid kit in case Elaine was injured. Then I headed out, using my phone's GPS to navigate to the nature preserve. The entrance was marked by a weathered wooden sign identifying it as Blackwood Nature Area, no entry after dusk. A chain was stretched across the narrow access road, but a path around it showed that many visitors ignored the restriction. I parked nearby, pocketed my keys, and set off on foot. The woods were dense and dark, the path barely visible under the canopy of trees that blocked what little moonlight filtered through the cloudy sky. My flashlight beam seemed weak and insignificant against the pressing darkness. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig under my foot, the distant call of a night bird, set my nerves on edge. I had been walking for perhaps 15 minutes when I noticed the change in atmosphere. The air grew colder, damper, heavy with the scent of stagnant water and rotting vegetation. I must be approaching the pond, Blackwood's Pool. The path widened slightly as I neared the water, the trees thinning enough to allow a view of the small, dark pool. Nothing about it seemed remarkable at first glance. Just a typical woodland pond surrounded by reeds, its surface still and black in the night. But as I stood at the edge, shining my light across the water, I noticed something odd about the far bank. There appeared to be a structure of some kind. Stones arranged in a rough circle around what might be an entrance to a cave or tunnel. I circled the pond, moving carefully through the underbrush, keeping my flashlight aimed low to avoid broadcasting my presence to anyone or anything that might be watching. As I drew closer to the stone formation, I began to make out details that sent a shiver down my spine. The stones were carved with familiar symbols, the same ones that had adorned the cornerstone and its smaller companion in the crawl space. And what I had taken for a cave entrance was actually a stone doorway set into the bank, its lintel inscribed with more symbols. This had to be it, some kind of ritual site connected to the entity, perhaps even predating Blackwood's interaction with it. But was Elaine here? Had whoever or whatever took her brought her to this place? I approached the doorway cautiously, listening for any sound that might indicate presence, human or otherwise. Silence greeted me, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the bank and the distant call of an owl. The doorway was small, requiring me to duck to pass through. Beyond was a narrow tunnel, its walls smooth stone sloping downward into darkness. The air flowing from it was cold and carried a strange metallic scent, unlike the natural decay of the pond. I hesitated at the threshold. Everything about this place screamed danger, warned me to turn back, to get help, to not face whatever lay beyond alone and unprepared. But Elaine was missing, possibly injured, possibly. I couldn't bring myself to complete the thought. Taking a deep breath, I ducked into the tunnel, shining my light ahead. The passage extended perhaps 30 feet before opening into a larger space. As I moved forward, I noticed that the walls were not natural stone but worked masonry, ancient but purposeful. This was a constructed chamber buried beneath the earth, hidden from casual discovery. When I reached the end of the tunnel, the beam of my flashlight revealed a circular room about 20 feet in diameter. The walls were lined with more of the strange symbols, these carved deeper, more elaborate than those I had seen before. The floor was smooth stone, sloping gently toward a circular depression in the center, a basin of sorts, filled with what appeared to be black water. But it was what lay beside this basin that made my heart stop. A figure unmoving, lying on the stone floor. Elaine! I rushed forward, dropping to my knees beside her. She was unconscious but breathing, her pulse weak but steady under my fingertips. There was a gash on her forehead, crusted with dried blood, but otherwise she seemed uninjured. I shook her gently, calling her name, but she didn't stir. What had brought her here? The same force that had created those footsteps in the basement? And why leave her alive? A sound from behind made me whirl around, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness to illuminate the tunnel entrance. Something was coming. A shadow darkening the already dim passage, moving with that same fluid, unnatural motion I had come to associate with the entity. I stood, positioning myself between the approaching darkness and Elaine's unconscious form. The kitchen knife seemed laughably inadequate now, but I gripped it anyway for what little comfort it provided. Come no closer, I warned, my voice steadier than I felt. I destroyed your bindings. You have no power here anymore. A soft laugh echoed through the chamber. Not the rustling leaf sound of the entity, but something more human, more mundane. A figure stepped into the chamber. Not a shadow being, but a woman, middle-aged, unremarkable, except for the intensity of her gaze. Mr. Reynolds, she said, her tone conversational, as if we were meeting at a coffee shop rather than in an underground chamber in the middle of the night. I wondered if you would find your way here. It took me a moment to place her, to connect this calm, composed woman with the nervous, evasive person I had met months before. Margaret, I said finally. The realtor. She inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the identification. I'm glad you remember. Our interactions were brief. What have you done to Elaine? I demanded, gesturing toward my unconscious friend. Why bring her here? I didn't harm your friend, Margaret said, stepping further into the chamber. That was unfortunate but necessary. She was in the way. As for bringing her here, this place has its own attraction for those connected to the entity. I merely facilitated the journey. Connected to the entity? What are you talking about? Elaine has nothing to do with this. Margaret's smile was pitying. Everyone who enters that house becomes connected to it, some more deeply than others. You, Mr. Reynolds, your connection is particularly strong. You've felt it, haven't you? The dreams? The certainty that led you first back to the house and then here? That's the entity's influence reaching for you, calling to you. My mind raced, trying to make sense of her words, of her presence here. You know about the entity. You've known all along. That's why you were so nervous showing me the house. You knew what was there. I am its caretaker, she said simply, as my mother was before me, and her mother before that. The Blackwood bloodline continues, though the name has changed over generations. You're related to Thaddeus Blackwood? You're his descendant? The revelation stunned me. The nervous realtor who had sold me the house was actually part of this, had been from the beginning. His great-great-granddaughter, she confirmed. Our family has always understood the responsibility that comes with that legacy. The entity must be maintained, contained, fed. The house serves as its vessel, the stones as its bindings. Fed? I repeated, disgust rising within me. You've been deliberately selling that house to people, knowing what would happen to them. The Winters family, the Calders, me. We were all just food for this thing? Margaret's expression hardened. You understand nothing. The entity is ancient, powerful beyond your comprehension. Without the bindings, without the periodic sustenance it receives, it would be free to expand its influence far beyond Blackwood Lane. The deaths are regrettable but necessary. Necessary? Anger replaced fear, hot and clarifying. Tell that to Emily Winters, tell that to her mother. Tell that to all the spirits trapped in that house for decades. Sacrifices must be made for the greater good, she said coldly. But you've disrupted the balance. Destroying the cornerstone was bad enough. It took considerable effort to strengthen the secondary binding afterward. But now you've destroyed that too. The entity is weakened but stirring, its containment failing. Do you have any idea what you've done? As if in answer to her question, the black water in the central basin began to move, rippling outward from the center, though nothing had disturbed its surface. The temperature in the chamber plummeted, my breath clouding before me. Margaret's eyes widened slightly, the first sign of genuine emotion I had seen from her. It comes, she whispered, her tone almost reverent. After all these years, it comes fully into our world. The water in the basin was rising now, not flowing over, the edges but building upon itself, forming a column that twisted and writhed like a living thing. As it grew, it began to take on a familiar shape, tall, thin, wrong in its proportions. But this manifestation was different from what I had seen in the house. More substantial, more present. What you saw before was merely its shadow, Margaret said, seeming to read my thoughts. A projection of its essence through the bindings. This is its true form beginning to manifest. The entity towered over us now, its body still liquid but solidifying, becoming something that might almost pass for human if seen in poor light from a distance. Its face remained a blank expanse with those terrible empty eye sockets, but now a mouth was forming, a black gash that widened into something resembling a smile. Free, it said, its voice no longer a chorus of whispers but a single resonant tone that vibrated in my chest. After centuries, I am free. Margaret stepped forward, her hands raised in a gesture that might have been supplication or welcome. Great one, she intoned. We have prepared for this day. The bloodline has remained true. I offer myself as your vessel, your voice in this world." The entity's attention shifted to her, its eyeless gaze somehow conveying interest. "The Blackwood blood," it said. "Yes, you have served well, but I require more than just a voice." Before I could react, a tendril of the entity's fluid form shot out, engulfing Margaret where she stood. There was no time for her to scream, no struggle. One moment she was there, the next she was gone, absorbed into the entity's mass. The creature seemed to shudder, its form shifting as it incorporated whatever it had taken from Margaret. When it stabilized again, its features were more defined, still inhuman, still wrong, but with a terrible intelligence now visible in the depths of those empty eye sockets. "Much better," it said, and the voice was partially Margaret's now, layered beneath the entity's otherworldly tone. "Now for the other." Its attention swung to Elaine, still unconscious on the floor. Another tendril began to extend toward her. "No." I lunged forward, the kitchen knife slashing at the liquid appendage. To my surprise, the blade connected with something solid, slicing through the tendril, which recoiled with a sound like a hiss. The entity studied me, head tilting at an impossible angle. "The destroyer of bindings," it said. "You have served your purpose already. Step aside." "I won't let you take her," I said, standing my ground between the entity and Elaine. "Whatever you are, whatever your purpose here, it ends now." The entity's laugh was Margaret's laugh, distorted and stretched. "Brave. Foolish. What do you think you can do against me? I have waited centuries for this moment, patient through confinement, feeding on the scraps tossed to me by the Blackwood line. Now I am free to take what I need to grow as I was meant to grow." "What are you?" I asked, stalling for time, desperately trying to think of some way to fight this thing, to get Elaine to safety. "What do you want?" "I am older than your civilization," it said. "I have been called many names by many cultures. God, demon, spirit. None are accurate. I exist between your reality and others, feeding on the energy of consciousness, fear, pain, despair. Such exquisite flavors. And now that you're free, what's your plan?" The entity's form rippled, an approximation of a shrug. "To feed, to grow, to spread beyond this insignificant patch of land. Your world is so full of potential sustenance." It began to move forward, forcing me to back up until I felt the edge of the basin against my legs. I was trapped with nowhere left to retreat. "You cannot stop what has already begun," the entity said. "But you can join it, become part of something greater than your brief human existence." Another tendril shot out, too fast to dodge, wrapping around my arm. The cold was excruciating, burning like acid against my skin. I felt something being drawn from me, not blood or tissue, but something more fundamental, as if my very essence were being siphoned away. In desperation, I slashed with the knife again, severing the connection. The entity recoiled, and I noticed something strange. Where the knife had cut, the creature's liquid form didn't immediately reform. It remained separate, the severed piece dissolving into ordinary water that splashed to the stone floor. Iron. The knife was iron, stainless steel, but with enough iron content to affect the entity. Like so many folklore creatures, it had a vulnerability to cold iron. But what could I do with this knowledge? The knife was a small weapon against such a massive presence. I needed something more substantial, something that could cause real damage. As the entity gathered itself for another attack, my flashlight beam caught on something half hidden behind a projecting stone at the edge of the chamber. The glint of metal. Keeping my eyes on the entity, I edged toward it, ready to dodge if another tendril came my way. When I reached the spot, I found a metal rod about 3 feet long, iron by the look and weight of it, possibly some kind of ceremonial tool used in whatever rituals had been performed here. It was crusted with age but still solid. I grabbed it just as the entity surged forward again. This time I was ready, swinging the iron rod in a wide arc that connected with its advancing form. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The creature shrieked, a sound that contained echoes of every voice it had absorbed as its liquid body sizzled and steamed where the iron had touched it. "Iron hurts you," I said, understanding dawning. That's why the bindings worked. They were reinforced with iron, weren't they? The cornerstone, the second stone, both had iron at their core. The entity retreated slightly, its form rippling with what might have been pain or rage. "Clever. Human," it hissed. "But your weapon is small and I am vast. You cannot touch all of me at once, and I am patient. I can wait until exhaustion claims you, until your guard drops for just a moment." It was right. I couldn't keep swinging the rod indefinitely. Sooner or later I would tire, make a mistake. And Elaine remained vulnerable, unconscious on the cold stone. I needed a more permanent solution, something that would drive the entity back, contain it again, or destroy it entirely. But what? The bindings were gone, the cornerstone shattered, the second stone destroyed. What else was there? My gaze fell on the basin from which the entity had emerged. It was the source, the point of connection between whatever realm the creature normally inhabited and our world. If I could somehow disrupt that connection. The entity seemed to sense my thoughts, moving to position itself between me and the basin. "No more bindings," it growled. "No more imprisonment. I have waited too long for freedom." It attacked again, multiple tendrils shooting out simultaneously from different directions. I swung the iron rod in desperate arcs, slicing through some but unable to stop them all. One wrapped around my leg, another around my torso, the cold burning through clothing to the skin beneath. I fell to one knee, the iron rod still clutched in my hand, but my strength fading as the entity drew more of my essence into itself. Through dimming eyes, I saw Elaine stir slightly, beginning to regain consciousness. If she woke now, she would be defenseless. "Take me," I gasped, a plan forming even as my vision began to tunnel. "Leave her. Take me instead." The entity paused, its eyeless gaze fixed on me. "Why would you offer yourself? What deception do you plan?" "No deception," I managed. "Just a trade. My life for hers. Let her go, and I'll stop fighting. I'll give you what you want." The creature considered, its form shifting with deliberation. "Your essence is strong," it acknowledged. "Your fear exquisite, your despair potent, a worthy meal." "Then we have a deal?" I forced the words out through the pain, willing myself to stay conscious just a little longer. The entity's approximation of a head nodded. The tendrils around my body tightened, drawing me closer to its main mass. "A deal," it agreed. As it began to absorb me, pulling me into its liquid form, I made my move. With the last of my strength, I drove the iron rod straight down, not at the entity, but at the stone beneath us, at the edge of the basin that served as its gateway to our world. The ancient stone, weakened by centuries of exposure to the entity's unnatural presence, cracked with a sound like thunder. A fissure opened, running from the basin's edge to its center. Water began to drain away, disappearing into the depths beneath. The entity shrieked, its hold on me loosening as it turned its attention to the damaged gateway. "What have you done?" it roared, Margaret's voice now just one of many in the cacophony of its rage. "Broken your connection," I gasped, crawling away as the car crunched up the gravel driveway, tires groaning as if reluctant to stop in front of the ancient structure. Rain clung to the windows, making the silhouette of the house shimmer like it was trying to shift out of focus. Mira Jacobs stepped out into the cold October drizzle, boots sinking slightly into the mossy ground. She tightened her coat, her eyes drifting up to the gabled windows of the two-story manor she'd just inherited. Creswell. House, she murmured to herself. The will had been precise. To Mira Ann Jacobs I leave the Creswell estate. You are to reside there for no less than 90 days before any sale or transfer. The clause felt strange, possessive even, but Mira hadn't questioned it, not when she had nowhere else to go. Fresh out of a turbulent breakup and laid off from her editing job, the idea of a secluded retreat seemed almost romantic. Until now. Until she stood in front of a house that seemed to watch her. The key turned with an unsettling smoothness, as though the house had been expecting her. The interior was suffocatingly still, stale air and furniture draped in white sheets. The walls bore decades of silence, every wooden beam soaked in untold memories. As Mira moved from room to room, she noticed something odd. There were no mirrors, not a single one. Not in the bathroom, not over the mantels, not even decorative ones on the walls. For a house this old, that was unnatural. That night she explored the west wing, a hallway that dipped slightly like the house was sinking on one side. At the very end she found a door different from the others. Thicker, darker, its handle, cold to the touch, it was locked. And unlike the others, it bore a nameplate etched in brass. The Mirror Room. It began on the third night. Mira lay in bed, listening to the storm outside. The wind whined through the trees like a wounded animal, but it wasn't the wind that woke her, it was a voice. Faint, soft, just below a whisper. So quiet she wasn't even sure she'd heard it. She sat up in bed, straining her ears. Again, just beneath the surface of sound. Mira. She stood, pulse quickening. The hallway outside her room was dark, but not entirely silent. A faint tapping, like nails on glass, echoed from the west wing. The direction of the locked room. She held her breath, then stepped back into her room and shut the door. This was just an old house. Old houses creaked, drafts played tricks. She repeated that until she fell asleep. But her dreams were full of mirrors that showed empty rooms and voices that knew her name. By the end of the first week, Mira had cleaned most of the house. In the attic, buried beneath old linens and rusted boxes, she found a bundle wrapped in oilskin. Inside was a skeleton key, ornate and heavy, unmistakably antique. She knew what it opened. Heart hammering, she returned to the west wing. The storm outside had quieted, but the air felt charged like the eye of something waiting. She placed the key into the lock. It turned, groaning with age. The door creaked open. What lay inside stole her breath. Mirrors, dozens of them, lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Tall, thin, some cracked, some pristine, some covered in a film of dust that dulled their shine. They reflected not just the room, but warped angles of reality, corners that didn't exist, doors that weren't there. And then she noticed something worse. Her reflection was missing. She backed away, eyes wide. The mirrors showed everything in the room except her. As she stepped closer again, she felt something cold trail across her shoulder, though the air was still. Then she saw it. A smudge. No, a handprint. On the inside of the mirror nearest to her, like someone had pressed against it from within. Panicked, Mira turned to leave, but as she reached the door, she saw something move in the corner of her eye. One of the mirrors. The reflection was no longer blank. Its center, a pale face stared back. Eyes hollow, mouth stitched shut with black thread. Behind it, countless others. Not reflections, prisoners. And at the bottom of the glass, etched in something darker than ink, A word slowly began to form. One of us. Mira slammed the door shut behind her, her breath catching in her throat. She backed away, heart pounding, so violently it echoed in her ears. The key still dangled from the lock, trembling slightly as if the house itself had exhaled. She turned away from the west wing and forced herself to walk, slowly, steadily, toward her bedroom, resisting the urge to run. Running felt like something prey would do, and something told her the house could smell fear. She didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the old pipes became a whisper, a footstep, a breath that wasn't hers. But what disturbed her more than anything was her own absence in the bathroom mirror the next morning. The fog from her hot shower had cleared. The sink reflected, the walls reflected, but where she should have been, nothing. Just empty space. She rubbed at her eyes. Maybe it was trauma. Stress. She opened her phone camera, flipped it to selfie mode, and stared. Her face stared back, tired and pale. A relief until she realized that behind her, in the image, stood a figure. Barefoot, gaunt, mouth stitched shut. Mira screamed and dropped the phone. When she looked again, the screen had cracked, the figure gone. She wanted to pack, to leave immediately, but something strange happened the moment she began folding clothes into her bag. The lights in the house dimmed. Her car keys vanished from the entry table where she always left them. When she tried the front door, the knob turned, but the frame wouldn't budge, like it had been sealed from the outside. The windows wouldn't open. Not a single one. She was trapped. That night, the mirrors came to her, not just in the west wing, but throughout the house. Her hallway mirror, long dormant, showed a flicker. She caught it while passing by, something blinking inside it. Not a trick of light, a presence. The ornate mirror in the dining room was louder. It hummed softly as she passed, a dull vibration in the air that prickled her skin. When she dared to touch its surface, it was warm, and it moved. Not the mirror, but the glass itself. It flexed just barely, like the surface of still water disturbed by a single breath. She didn't touch it again. On the fourth night, Mira heard a knock at her bedroom door. She hadn't locked it. Why hadn't she locked it? She sat up in bed, frozen. 3 more knocks, slow, steady, then silence. She whispered, "Who's there?" The answer came not from the hallway, but from the closet mirror, which she had covered with a bedsheet earlier that day. The fabric rustled. "Mira," a voice breathed. Soft, familiar. It was her mother's voice, but her mother had died 5 years ago. The voice continued, muffled through the sheet. "Come see me." "No," Mira whispered, inching away. "You're not her." A low chuckle echoed in the room. The sheet slid from the mirror without any visible hand pulling it. Mira turned her face away, refusing to look. She stared at the floor until the whispering stopped, until the light stopped flickering. The next morning, the word "look" had been scratched into her window pane from the inside. She tried to ignore it. She forced herself to focus on anything. Normal, reading, organizing, even journaling. But the reflections refused to be ignored. Her coffee mug reflected dozens of faces where only one should have been. Her phone refused to take pictures of her unless a second figure appeared beside her. Never the same, always wrong. On the 6th day, she found a journal buried in the hallway linen closet, thin, with yellowed pages and a cracked leather cover. The name inside had faded, but the handwriting was neat and deliberate. "I don't know if I'm still alive." The mirrors speak. They remember every sin. They feed on secrets. That's how they grow. They show you what you hide from others, from yourself. Further down the page, if you're reading this, you've already been marked. The moment you stepped into the mirror room, it began. You won't see yourself again until you belong to them. Mira dropped the journal and stumbled back, bile rising in her throat. She had entered that room. She had stayed too long. Later that evening, she stared into the fireplace in the main hall. No mirrors there, no glass, just flame. Warm. Real. She stayed there for hours, afraid to blink, afraid the moment she turned away, something would be there watching. At 2:13 a.m., she heard something breathing behind her, not whispering, not calling, just breathing. Deep. Slow. As if the mirror itself had lungs. She turned, and every glass surface in the room, from picture frames to the china cabinet, had fogged over. Handprints, child-sized and trembling, appeared in the condensation. Then a message slowly wrote itself on the glass. "We see you now." Mira sat motionless, frozen in the middle of the hall, her eyes locked on the fogged-over message across the china cabinet. "We see you now." It had smeared itself into the glass like a child's finger painting, except it wasn't childish. It was deliberate. Possessive. She backed away slowly, avoiding any reflection she could. The glint off picture frames, the shine of a polished doorknob. Anything reflective had become an enemy. By the time she reached the kitchen, her breathing was shallow and her hands trembled. She opened the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of water, but even the stainless steel handle bore a hazy impression of a face, her own or something that wore her face. The moment she blinked, it was gone. "This can't be real," she muttered, holding her head in her hands. "I'm hallucinating. It's isolation. Just stress and a house full of drafty rooms." But deep down, she knew. This wasn't just in her mind. She hadn't truly seen herself in 7 days. She hadn't truly been alone in longer than that. She tried to leave again. Armed with a crowbar and a sledgehammer she found in the basement, Mira made her way to the front door. Her plan was simple: smash the stained glass window in the entryway, climb out and run as far as she could. She didn't care if she had to walk 20 miles barefoot. Anything was better than being under this roof. The first swing of the sledgehammer hit with a satisfying crunch. Cracks splintered across the colorful glass, but instead of breaking through to daylight, something else happened. The cracks spread, and the glass began to bleed. A thick black ooze seeped from the fractures in the window, sliding down like tar. The air filled with the stench of rot, like dead leaves soaked in stagnant water. Then, slowly, the glass began to pulse. It bulged outward with a sickening rhythm, as if the house was breathing through it. Mira screamed and dropped the sledgehammer. Behind her, a dozen mirrors down the corridor vibrated in unison. A hum filled the air, low, harmonic, hypnotic. She turned and fled. She retreated to the attic. Dust danced in the single beam of light that cut through the cracked skylight. Old furniture lay beneath sheets, hunched like sleeping beasts. Boxes were stacked high, filled with forgotten clothing, yellowed letters, broken toys. She dug through them, desperate for answers, until she found a photograph. A family, standing stiffly in front of the very house she was trapped in. Mother, father, 2 children, both girls. One was perhaps 6, the other no older than 11. And behind them, just barely visible in the photo's edge, stood the same door from the west wing. The mirror room. But there was no Mira in this photo. That should have comforted her. It didn't. She flipped it over. In pencil, someone had written, We moved in June 3rd. By the 12th, she wouldn't come out of the mirror. Mira felt her stomach lurch. That night, she set up every light she had in the living room. Lamps, candles, flashlights, all facing the nearest mirror. She taped towels over some, draped cloths over others, blocked a few with chairs. But still, she heard the whispers. Mira, stay with us. You're already halfway through. And then one of the candles blew out. No breeze, no movement. The flame just died. She didn't light it again. The fireplace had gone cold, despite the wood still burning. The room was darker, though all the lamps were on, and the glass covering the fireplace's iron screen had fogged over again. This time the message was different. She's still in here. Sleep became impossible. Food turned to ash in her mouth. Her reflection now appeared randomly, never directly, only in flashes when she looked away, and it never mimicked her. Sometimes it smiled when she cried. Sometimes it looked behind her when she was alone. On the 9th night, she saw the little girl, a face in the mirror above the hall cabinet. Small, pale, eyes wide with silent pleading. The same girl from the photograph. She pressed her tiny hands against the inside of the mirror and mouthed something. Mira stepped closer. The girl repeated the words silently. She's trapped. Then a second face appeared behind the girl, distorted, skeletal, wearing a grin that split the skin down both cheeks. It reached for the girl from behind and she vanished with a scream Mira never heard. Mira fell to her knees. This house was a prison. The mirrors weren't decoration. They were doors, and something had opened them. There were people trapped in there. Not ghosts, not echoes. Real people, children, maybe even adults, drawn in, forgotten, consumed. And now the house wanted her too. Not just her image, not just her reflection. It wanted her soul. But once inside, nothing reflects reality. The decision came, not with courage, but with despair. Mira sat on the floor of the hallway, the house groaning around her as if shifting in its sleep. Her eyes were dry from crying. Her legs ached from pacing. The whispers hadn't stopped in days. They came from the vents, the pipes, the walls, and above all, from the mirrors. You'll never leave. Come to us. Let go. She had tried every exit, every logical, tangible way out. But logic no longer applied. She had screamed for help until her throat bled. The phone was dead. The house devoured signals. The only thing left was them. The mirrors. The girl in the reflection haunted her mind. The terror in her wide eyes. The way she mouthed, "She's trapped." The way she disappeared, like a bubble popped in water. Mira stood in front of the hallway mirror now. Tall, arched, its frame carved with ivy and thorns. She had avoided it since the first day. Now, it was her only chance. She pressed a trembling hand to the cold glass. "If you're still in there, I'm coming." For the first time, the surface rippled, not like a trick of light, but like a pond kissed by wind. And then her hand sank in. The sensation was unbearable. Cold, but not physical cold. Emotional. Like grief, rage, and fear were liquid, and she had plunged her arm through them. It resisted, not as if trying to push her back, but pulling her forward. Her shoulder slipped through, then her face, then the rest of her, and then she was gone. Inside the mirror, Mira stood in a room made entirely of reflections. Walls of polished silver, floor like a frozen lake of glass, ceiling stretching into a sky of endless mirrored shards. Yet she cast no reflection here either. She turned. The mirror she'd stepped through was gone. No doorway, no trace, just a never-ending hallway of glass. And it was quiet, not peaceful, waiting. She walked. With each step, the world around her flickered. Images formed in the mirrors. Rooms she recognized. The Creswell dining hall, the master bedroom, her own apartment before she'd lost it, her mother's hospital bed, and then worse, memories. Her childhood closet, dark and locked. Her first boyfriend, shouting in her face. The night she had, ignored her sister's panicked call. The night she'd overdosed and died. No. Mira gasped, backing away. The mirrors were watching her. Not just showing the past, feasting on it. Her pain was their power. She ran. The glass beneath her didn't break, but it groaned. The corridors stretched and twisted, new paths opening like arteries. She turned corner after corner, but there were no doors, no exits, just mirrors. Some empty, some full. One showed her body, real, asleep in a bed, eyes closed, mouth parted slightly. But she wasn't in it. Another showed her crying in a bathtub, fully clothed, sobbing, "I'm sorry," again and again. She didn't remember that one, not yet. And then she saw her again, the girl, pressed against the far end of a mirrored corridor, paler now, flickering like a dying flame. Her lips no longer moved. Her eyes looked right through Mira. "Hey!" Mira shouted, running to her. "I see you, I'm here." The girl didn't move. Mira reached out and touched glass. No entrance. Just a trap. Something dark moved behind the girl. That grinning figure again. Stitch mouth, bone thin. Its hands glided across the surface of the mirror as though swimming under ice. "No!" Mira banged the mirror with her fists. "Let her go." The glass shivered, but didn't break. Then a whisper slid into her ear, closer than anything had ever been. "You can't save her. Not without giving us something first." She turned slowly. Behind her stood dozens of mirrored versions of herself, each different. One was older, one younger, one bleeding, one smiling with black eyes. They circled her, inching closer. "We are you," they said together. "Everything. You denied every sin, every secret." Mira clenched her fists. "Then take it." The crowd paused. "I'm not running. I'm not hiding. You want guilt, pain, regret?" Her voice rose with defiance. "Take it all." She stepped into one of the reflections. Instantly, pain engulfed her. She saw every failure, every betrayal. Her mother's funeral, the voicemail from her sister she had deleted, every lie she'd told herself about love and safety. It ripped through her like fire. And then, silence. The mirror shattered, and behind it, a door. She stumbled through. On the other side was a room, not mirrored, not twisted, real. It looked like a child's bedroom, dusty, forgotten, but grounded in reality. Toys lay scattered. A music box played itself in the corner. And on the bed, the girl, pale, eyes closed, breathing shallow. Mira rushed to her. "Hey, I found you. I found you." The girl didn't move. Mira reached down and took her hand. It was warm, and the moment their fingers touched, a surge of light burst from the walls, blinding, golden, human. The mirror realm screamed. Glass cracked all around. The walls began to collapse. Mira scooped the girl into her arms and ran, no longer looking for doors, only light. Here is the final installment of your horror story. The mirrors were breaking, not one by one, but all at once, like glass shattering in every direction across an endless cathedral of silver. The air was alive with sound. The roar of thunder trapped in a maze of echoes, the screaming of something ancient and wounded, and beneath it all, the whisper of a lullaby fading into dust. Mira ran. The girl clutched in her arms, stirred faintly, but did not wake. Her breath was steady, small hands curled into Mira's jacket. Every step Mira took was onto unstable ground, mirror shards that twisted and sank like water, then surged upward to form walls again. The realm was folding in on itself, and something was chasing her. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She felt it. It moved like smoke, like ink in water, pulling itself together and falling apart in the same breath. The stitch mouth, the thing that fed on reflection, on memory, on regret. The master of this house and its secret mirror. And now, it was angry. You broke the cycle, it whispered through the glass, though there was no glass left, only fragments. She was ours. You were ours. Mira's chest burned with each breath. She didn't know where she was running. There was no path, no direction. But up ahead she saw something, a light, warm, steady, like a hearth, like hope. The mirror room, the real one. The mirrors on its walls were flickering now, blinking like dying eyes. The glass was fogged, cracked, fractured beyond recognition. But in one of them, a tall, floor-length panel near the center, Mira saw herself, her real self. Still, pale, asleep, but visible. This was the mirror she had entered through. The way out. She ran for it. As she neared the mirror, the entity surged in front of it, rising from the floor like a shadow-given mass. Its face twisted into something almost human, a poor imitation, stitched lips curling into a mockery of pain. You brought her out, it hissed, but one must stay. Mira slowed. Her boots skidded on fractured glass. The girl in her arms whimpered. One must stay. The voice repeated, quieter now. To seal it. To end it. The mirror cannot stay open. Mira's heart thundered. She looked down at the girl. The child's lashes fluttered, her face calm now. Whatever had held her here was breaking, but the stitch mouth was right. The mirror had been a door, but also a seal. If it stayed open, if both Mira and the girl escaped, it would become a crack in the world. The entity could find others, grow stronger, escape the house entirely, unless someone stayed, unless someone closed it from the inside. No, Mira whispered. No, there has to be another way. There isn't, the entity crooned, but we will take you gently. We will keep you close. You will never feel alone again. Mira shook her head, eyes wild with tears. That's not love. That's prison. The mirror flickered again. It was beginning to fade. She only had seconds left. She knelt, holding the girl tightly one last time. You don't belong here, she whispered into her ear. Go home. Be free. She stood, kissed the child's forehead, and with a trembling hand, pushed her through the mirror. The girl vanished. Gone. Safe. And Mira turned back to face the entity. Her reflection now stood still in every fragment around her, strong, defiant, no longer afraid. The house groaned. The mirror behind her began to hum, and Mira smiled. You're not feeding off me anymore. And with that, she slammed her fist into the remaining glass. shattering it from inside. Outside the mirror room, the girl awoke with a gasp. She lay in the center of the mirror room, covered in dust, but alive. The house was silent. No more whispers. No more cold. The mirrors on the walls were just that now. Mirrors. Empty. Broken. Powerless. She stepped carefully through the glass-strewn floor, pushed open the door, and walked down the long hallway. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The front door stood open. She was free. 3 months later, the house on Creswell Lane was sold at auction. A new couple moved in. They replaced all the broken mirrors, painted over the dark walls, and brought light back into its corridors. They never knew about Mira Jacobs, the missing woman who had once inherited the house and vanished without a trace. No police report, no family to pursue. Just an entry in a dusty will, now forgotten. But sometimes, at night, when the lights go out, a faint breath fogs the mirrors, and in one reflection for the briefest second just behind your shoulder, you might see her, watching, smiling, making sure it stays sealed forever.